Yes, good evening. Welcome, everybody. Welcome, as usual, to our AJA Zoom events, both to our regulars, and if you're new to us, then welcome to you as well. We also welcome those watching on Facebook, and to anybody listening to the audio replay, which is broadcast every Thursday at midday and Sundays at 4 p.m. on J-Air Community Radio, which is at FM 88 in Melbourne or at j-air.com.au everywhere else. My name is Alan Friedman. I'm Vice President of the Australian Jewish Association, and also visible on your screens, David Adler, President of the AJA, and our guest for tonight, Dr Kobi Michael. And the topic, of course, is the Palestinian Authority on a journey to nowhere. That sounds very, very interesting. The format will be that Kobi will do a presentation, and then we'll take questions from the audience. And as I usually mention, if you want to ask a question, we do ask that you raise your hand electronically. And the way to do that is click on the reaction icon at the bottom of the screen, and then you'll see the little hand raise. And that way we get to see that you want to ask a question and put you in the queue. You can put written questions on the chat if you want to, and Robert Gregory, our Director of Public Affairs, will read some of them out during question time. And of course, if you don't like the chat, you can disable at any time. Now, it's been 30 years since the Palestinian Authority was established to facilitate independence for the Palestinian Arabs in a state with Jerusalem as its capital. So it's reasonable to ask questions such as, what exactly has it achieved? And if the answer is not much, then what is its reason for being and where does it go to from here? Apart from fighting Israel, the PA is also at loggerheads with Hamas, which also sees itself as the organisation best able to, quote, liberate the Palestinians from the yoke of Israeli oppression, apartheid and colonisation. So where does all this leave Israel? Do Israelis worry as much about this as we in the diaspora do? Or do they just get on with their lives until something better happens? Dr Kobi Michael is a Senior Research Fellow at the Institute for National Security Studies, a think tank affiliated with Tel Aviv University, dealing in areas of national security. Among his primary research interests are conflict resolution, strategy, national security, civil-military relations, socio-military relations, failed states and peacekeeping and state-building operations, and of course the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. He has published 18 books and over 100 articles and chapters in books, and has been awarded several academic prizes, which all make him very qualified to discuss the Palestinian Authority. And we're delighted to have him with us tonight. Kobi, thank you very much for your time and welcome to our Australian audience.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the opportunity. My name is Kobi Michael, and in addition to my current occupation, I think that it is right to mention that I deal with the Israeli-Palestinian issue for more than 3 decades, from any aspect or dimension that you can imagine. It was during my military service. I had also the opportunity or the privilege to be one of the founders and the first commander of the Israeli-Palestinian security coordination apparatus in the Gaza Strip in the year of 1994, immediately after signing the Oslo A agreement. And later on, during the years of 1999 and 2000, I commanded the apparatus in the West Bank. I was involved in the official negotiations with the Palestinians, and then in Track 2 negotiation, I served at the Ministry of Strategic Affairs and the Israeli National Security Council as the head of the Palestinian division, and of course in my academic career and at the INSS, as it was mentioned. So understanding that you are pretty eager to know what is the bottom line of my presentation or my analysis, I can tell you in one sentence that I think that generally speaking, the Palestinian Authority is a lost case. by saying that, let's begin, okay, the presentation from the first beginning, and I will try to elaborate on this argument. Where is the presentation now? Here it is.
That's it.
Okay, you can see it?
Yes, we can see your whole screen,
okay,
including the little panels on the side.
Great. So first of all,
sorry, can we try pressing F5, function 5? Someone has suggested that that's the way to get full screen. That might be on PowerPoint, but not necessarily on Zoom.
I didn't understand. What did you ask me to do?
Can you press the F5 button? F5.
Just the F5?
Well, let's try that.
Or F5 with control.
F5 on the computer.
I'm pressing on the F5, but nothing.
Okay, nothing's happening. Okay, let's proceed.
Okay, so I think that first of all we have to clarify the differences, because people tend to be confused between two entities, the PA and the PLO. Okay, the PA is the Palestinian Authority, and it was established in May '94, following the Oslo Accords, or based on the Oslo Accords. And actually, this is the platform that was supposed to create the infrastructure for the establishment of the independent Palestinian state. Actually, the Palestinian Authority is the government of the Palestinian entity in the Palestinian territories, in the West Bank and in the Gaza Strip. The Palestinian Authority has no official status with regard to the political process. It doesn't mean that officials from the PA are not involved in the political process, because there are some, I would say, overlappings between the PA and the PLO with regard to some officials, because they are members of the PLO, and at the very same time there are officials in the Palestinian Authority. But the Palestinian Authority as an entity has no official status in the political process. The counterpart of Israel in the political process is the PLO. The problem is that I would say in the last 3 decades or so, since the establishment of the Palestinian Authority, the Palestinian Authority became to be much more important and influential in comparison to the PLO, but the PLO still has the official role in the political process. So this is, I would say, another dimension of the complex situation in the Palestinian arena. As I say, the Palestinian Authority was established in order to advance or to promote the establishment of the Palestinian state, to end the Israeli occupation. I would say that the main role of the Palestinian Authority was the institution building or the state building process. Eventually, the Palestinian Authority did establish an institution, and the Palestinian Authority does provide, I would say, some public services to the Palestinian population, like education, health, welfare services, and so on and so forth. But generally speaking, the functional level of this institution is very low, and I will elaborate on that in a minute or so. And I would say that talking about the phenomenon of failed state, where one of the characteristics is the low functional level of the state institutions, then the Palestinian Authority fits to this category, because the level of the functional level of the institution is pretty low. I would say that they are dysfunctional, generally speaking. The Palestinian Authority, unfortunately, can be characterized from its first beginning, from day one, as corrupted, inefficient, and I think that talking about the last decade or so, I would say that the Palestinian Authority suffers from eroding legitimacy and popular and public support. I think that the euphoria in the, I would say, the forming years of the Oslo process, 94 to 96, 97, I think that the Palestinian Authority gained support and popularity and legitimacy among the Palestinian constituency, but since then we can notice the erosion process with regard to legitimacy and popular support. Although the Palestinian Authority is not a state entity in its official, I would say, definition, okay? Although in the eyes of the Palestinian leadership, it is already a state, and it was recognized by 142 countries in the General Assembly of the UN as well. But officially, it is not a state, it is a semi-state entity, but it is a failed semi-state entity. In comparison to many Arab countries surrounding us, surrounding Israel, especially after the decade of the so-called Arab Spring, okay, which I prefer to term as the Arab upheaval, the Palestinian Authority performance is relatively in a higher level, okay? This is a sort of a paradox. On the one hand, a failed entity, on the other hand, in comparison to the other Arab countries, in a better situation. Now, what is the main problem, as I understand, with regard to the Palestinian Authority or with regard to the Palestinian leadership? And I would say that this is the idea of the revolutionary ethos, okay? And the failure of the Palestinian leadership to actually succeed in the transformation process from a liberation terror organization to a state, okay? This transition process actually almost does not exist in the Palestinian context, and I think that in many aspects, the Palestinian leadership, as well as the Palestinian Authority as an entity, remains stick to the revolutionary ethos, okay? And despite the differences between Abu Mazen and Arafat, okay, and despite the fact that Abu Mazen doesn't support terrorism, even on the contrary, here between brackets, I would say that when I say that Abu Mazen doesn't support terrorism, it doesn't mean that he feels pretty sorrow about Jewish blood, okay, which is spilled because of Palestinian terrorists. He just thinks that terror doesn't serve the interests of the Palestinian right now, okay? But despite the differences between both of them, we saw that Abu Mazen also refused to at least the most significant proposal that was made by Israel. Even the Americans were astonished from this proposal that was made by Prime Minister Ehud Olmert in the end of 2008. He refused to this proposal, okay? Which means that although he doesn't support terrorism, I'm not sure that he really supports or able to cross the Rubicon in order to reach to a real peace treaty with Israel. And I would say that since Netanyahu came to power in 2009, okay, Abu Mazen actually has preferred the opposite approach, the opposite to negotiation, okay, to the bilateral negotiation with Israel. And the opposite approach was the idea of internationalization of the conflict, which means that the Palestinian leadership believed that they are able to push Israel to the corner in the international tribunals and to bring the international community to pressure Israel to enable the establishment of a Palestinian state, not through the bilateral negotiation between Israel and the Palestinians. And in this regard, the Palestinians will not have to pay the price that they should or must pay if a Palestinian state will be established through the bilateral negotiation. And the consequences, although they have reached to some, I would say, even significant and essential achievements, the most important one was in 2012 when the majority of the members of the UN General Assembly actually approved, okay, the declaration of the Palestinian state. I think that in perspective of a decade, it was another strategic failure of the Palestinians. And therefore, I think that the decade between 2009 2019 can be perceived as a lost decade for the Palestinians. And in order to understand what does it mean a lost decade, we have to understand the intensity of the crises that the Palestinian Authority went through during, I would say, the last 2 decades, in order to understand the current situation of the Palestinians, the current situation of the Palestinian Authority, and I would say the scale of the crisis, which is, I would say, a very essential crisis. So let me go just briefly to mention some major events that occurred in the last 2 decades that influenced or affected dramatically the stability, the legitimacy, the functionality of the Palestinian Authority. So I think that one of the most important events is, of course, the eruption of the Second Intifada, or the terror war in September 2000, that severely damaged the Palestinian Authority and actually brought it almost to crashing, okay? And we have to remember that the Palestinian Authority officially, the security apparatuses of the Palestinian Authority were deeply involved in this war terror in the Second Intifada. Okay, this was, I would say, actually a very significant crisis, trust crisis between Israel and the Palestinians. And if I have to put my finger on the tipping point with regard to the public opinion in Israel among the Jewish constituency, I would say that the eruption of the Second Intifada and the involvement of the Palestinian Authority in the Second Intifada, I think that this is the tipping point. And since then, actually, there is an erosion process in the support of the Jewish constituency in the political process with the Palestinian Authority, although there is still a majority among the Jewish constituency with regard to the principle of two-state solution. But in the very same time, the majority of the Jewish people doesn't think that it is possible and that we have a Palestinian partner in the other side. And by the way, a mirror image is in the Palestinian side as well. And the figures there are pretty similar to the figures in Israel. Now, I think that the status of the Palestinian Authority and the weakening of the Palestinian Authority has been accelerated since the disengagement from the Gaza Strip and the north of Judea and Samaria in September 2005. And why? This is because of Hamas and, of course, the occupation of the Gaza Strip in June 2007 following the disengagement. And actually, this is a very crucial tipping point in the Palestinian arena itself, which I will elaborate in a minute on. The next, I would say, problematic event was the Fatah defeat in the 2006 election. As you probably know, Hamas won the elections, and this was the beginning of the crisis. And I would say the very significant division. It is not only a political division, it is a religious division, it is a societal division, it is a cultural, a geographical division between two Palestinian entities, Hamas entity in the Gaza Strip and Fatah entity in the West Bank. And the elections of 2006 are the tipping point of this fragmentation. After Hamas took over Gaza on June 2007, actually it was a coup d'etat, not less than that. And I would like to remind everybody that during this coup d'etat, Hamas slaughtered, and this is the word, slaughtered some dozens and even more than that of Fatah members in the Gaza Strip, people that were affiliated with the security apparatuses of the Palestinian Authority, mainly with Mohammed Dahlan, okay, the preventive security apparatus in the Gaza Strip. I think that this event during June 2007 is a big and deep scare in the relations between Hamas and Fatah in the Palestinian arena. And since Hamas took over Gaza, they actually improved dramatically their military capacities. They build their infrastructures, and in a very paradoxical manner, I would say that in the last years, from the military point of view, Hamas is much stronger than all the security apparatuses of the Palestinian Authority. Another event which is very important to mention is the dismissal of Salaam Fayyad. Actually, Salaam Fayyad, and I will talk about it, Salaam Fayyad was appointed as prime minister, and Salaam Fayyad is not Fatah, he's not Hamas. Salaam Fayyad was educated in the United States, and although he is a Palestinian, okay, he has a very, very different point of view with regard to the Palestinian Authority and with regard to the Israeli-Palestinian issue, generally speaking. And it was a big hope for the Palestinians, but due to the fact that it was too good in his duty as a prime minister, actually he found his way out of the Palestinian arena because he fought very seriously the corruption, the nepotism in the Palestinian Authority, in the Palestinian security services. All the old guard of Fatah didn't like the idea, and therefore he found his way out of the Palestinian arena. And this is a very significant crisis with regard to the governance or with regard to the functionality of the Palestinian institutions, because during Salaam Fayyad terms, there was, I would say, a sort of a progress, in a sense, even I would say significant progress, but it was totally stopped, and there is a withdrawal, okay, to the bad years that we used to know before Salaam Fayyad, and this is the situation even these days. Trump's presidency is I think, the biggest crisis for the Palestinian Authority, for the PLO, for the Palestinian leadership. all the things that were done by the American administration under Trump, removing the U.S. embassy to Jerusalem, the Abraham Accords, stopping the financial aid to the Palestinian Authority, closing the PLO offices in Washington, and so on and so forth. This was, I would say, the worst years in the relations between the Palestinians and the Americans, and the scars are still there. And I think that Trump's presidency is very traumatic in the Palestinian eyes. Later on, we have the COVID-19 crisis and deepening split between the Palestinian Authority and Hamas. I would say that the outcome at the end of the day is that today we, not only today, since 2007, but it is much more, I would say, serious today. We are talking about two independent entities, two Palestinian, okay, independent entities, which are adversary. I mean, there is a zero-sum game between of them, and Israel is in sort of a catch-22 vis-a-vis both of them, because due to the zero-sum game between of them, and the idea that the Palestinian Authority has no say in the Gaza Strip, on the one hand, and Israel needs a reliable and responsible address in the Gaza Strip, which is unfortunately only Hamas today. Israel needs to cooperate or to coordinate with Hamas, even if it is not in an official manner, but Israel has to do that. By doing that, Israel actually legitimizes Hamas in this way or another. Israel strengthens Hamas in this way or another. And the idea of legitimizing Hamas or strengthening Hamas is actually in the other side, weakening the Palestinian Authority or weakening Fatah. And Israel, as I said before, finds itself in a sort of a catch-22. Maybe we'll have some time to elaborate on that later on. Okay. I talked about Salaam Fayyad, his achievement and his removal from office. One thing that it's worth mentioning is the end of occupation, establishment of the state. This was actually a very comprehensive document that was written by Salaam Fayyad himself. It has, I would say, two editions, 2009 and 2013. And this was a strategic plan to build the Palestinian institutions, to build the Palestinian state. And Salaam Fayyad said the following. And in this regard, many people think that Salaam Fayyad is the Palestinian Ben Gurion, because he was very pragmatic by saying that we have our national demand, okay? We believe that Palestine belongs to the Palestinians, but we have to acknowledge reality, and we have to put aside our national aspiration, and we have to concentrate on building our capacity, building our institution, building our state. And once we will have a state, we will be able to be in a better position negotiating Israel and demanding some further things from Israel. This was exactly, I would say, the Palestinian version of another goat and another tree, which was the proverb that Ben Gurion used in the forming years of the state of Israel, and even before the establishment of the state of Israel, understanding that we have to take what we can take, and we can, or we must do the best that we can do in order to build our capacities, and later on, by building our capacities, we will be able to demand more or to achieve more. But unfortunately, Salaam Fayyad was removed from his position because he touched the most sensitive, I would say, issues with regard to the old guard of the PLO, the old guard of the PA, and once they understood that they are going to lose their sources of wealth, okay, from the Palestinian Authority, they decided to remove him, and he's out of the Palestinian political arena these days. What has happened during the almost last decades of the existence of the Palestinian Authority, and this is something that goes back to the, if you remember, one of the first slides that I presented was the failure of the Palestinian leadership to make the transition process from the revolutionary ethos to the state building process. And what you can see now in this slide is
Kobi, you're stuck on the first slide. None of the slides have moved on.
really.
Yes, you've been on the first slide the whole time.
Oh, and just now you are telling me that?
Well, we weren't sure what the plan was.
So what can I do in order to make the slides move? Let me try to stop share and to reshare it. Oh, so you didn't see any slide, huh?
We were listening to your wisdom, not seeing the slides.
Oh. No, but the slides are pretty nice. Now
Okay.
you can see.
If you just click, yes, now it's on the second one. It says Palestinian Authority. Now it's on the third one. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so, and if I make it like that now, you see?
No,
Yes.
it hasn't changed. We see it, but it hasn't changed.
We see it. Now it's changed. It's got the keys.
Yeah.
Oh, I use this form, although there is no animation in this form. Okay. So I talked about, this is Salaam Fayyad. Okay, I talked about
Right.
Salaam Fayyad, and now I want to elaborate a bit on the first point that I made about the failure of the Palestinian leadership to make the transition process from the revolutionary ethos to the state building process. And I think that this is something which is reflected in two main aspects. Okay, the first one is the Palestinian principle about the absolute justice. You know, as I told you, I participated actively in negotiations with the Palestinians, the official negotiations and track 2 negotiations, and it is amazing to see how stubborn the Palestinians are with regard to their demand for the historical absolute justice, meaning that they first say you have to acknowledge, to accept the responsibility for the creation of the Palestinian problem, mainly the refugee problem, okay? And once you will acknowledge your responsibility for the historical sin, okay? Then we can continue further on, we can continue negotiating and continue talking about some, I would say, things that can be done with regard to the concessions that can be done with regard to the political process. And they have a principle that was a declared principle, and I heard it more than once, okay, during the negotiations, that nothing is agreed upon or until everything is agreed, okay? So first of all, we have to agree about everything, mainly about the Israeli responsibility for the creation of the Palestinian problem, and then, okay, after agreeing about everything, we can continue, which means that although the Israelis and the Palestinians have reached to many understandings, okay, and even agreements between of them with regard to water, environment, education, tourism, economy, transportation, okay, you name it, the Palestinians refused to implement, to realize these agreements till both sides will reach to all agreements, okay? And I would say that this is a very problematic standpoint, okay, for the Palestinian negotiators and for the Palestinian leadership. And this is something that symbolizes a very problematic approach or ethos, okay? This is not something which is suitable for statesmen, okay? This is not something which is suitable for an entity that wants to build a state or to reach independence. This is something which is very, I would say, suitable or fits a revolutionary ethos, a revolutionary movement. And in addition to that, during all the years of its existence, we have noticed the indoctrination of the Palestinian Authority through the curriculum, through the official statements made in the Palestinian media. And here, between brackets, I would say that it is very crucial, mainly and mostly for audience like you, okay, English native speakers. You have to understand that there are differences between declarations which are made in English to the ears of constituencies like you and the things that are spoken in Arabic, okay, for the Palestinian constituency. And I intend not to listen to the declaration which are made in English. I always prefer to listen carefully what is said by the Palestinian leaders in Arabic, what is written in the Palestinian media in Arabic, what appears in the social networks in Arabic, what appears in the Palestinian curriculum in Arabic. And when you follow all of these, I would say, appearances in the different on the different platforms, you notice that there is a very, I would say, comprehensive and very systematic indoctrination process of incitement and delegitimization of the state of Israel, of the Jewish people, the promotion of the idea of the right of return, and you can understand that at the end of the day, there is no ripeness among the Palestinian leadership, and therefore there is no ripeness among the Palestinian constituency to accept or to acknowledge or to recognize in the right of the state of Israel to exist as the nation state of the Jewish people in any borders, okay? And here, another important comment that should be made. The Palestinians do use the slogan or the principle or the saying of two-state solution. And they believe that by using this saying of two-state solution, they can buy the trust of the different constituencies or audiences in the international community. But the Palestinians refuse to add only one word to this saying, and this is the word nation, okay? What Israel says, that the principle for resolving the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is the principle of two-nation state, which means the state of Israel as the nation state of the Jewish people with equal civil rights for all of its citizens, of course, and the Palestinian state as the nation state for the Palestinian people. The Palestinians refuse to add this one word, nation, because the Palestinians and mainly their leaders, and mainly Abu Mazen, by the way, do not believe that there is a Jewish people at all. In their eyes, okay, the Jews, or I would say Judaism, is only a religious term. It's not a national term. There is no Jewish people. And if there is no Jewish people, there is no right for self-determination. And in their eyes, when they say two-state solution, they mean Palestine as the Palestinian state, as the nation state of the Palestinian people, and the state of Israel as the state of all of its citizens without any religious, ethnic, national affiliation or identity. And this is something that we have to remember. This is something that we have to understand. Because if you ask me, what is the main barrier to the Israeli-Palestinian, or in front of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, this is the main barrier. Not the settlements, not territories, and you know something, not even Jerusalem. This is the main obstacle. This is the main barrier. And you can find the reflection of the Palestinian approach in this regard in their curriculum, in their declarations, in their media, in the social networks, and so on and so forth. But this is not the only problem that the Palestinian Authority faces, I would say, in the last years or so. I would say that the main problem that the Palestinian Authority faces is the erosion of the legitimacy and popularity among its people, among the Palestinians themselves. The Palestinians stopped believed in the Palestinian Authority since years ago. And in the last 4 or 5 years, we see in all the polls, which are conducted by Khalil Shkaki, the leading pollers among the Palestinians research institutions, we see that more than 2/3 of the Palestinian constituency demand that Abu Mazen will resign from his position. And we see that Hamas becomes to be more and more popular. And the tipping point in this regard is the events of last May, okay, the Operations Guardians of the Walls. Because Hamas improves its strategic position in the Palestinian arena from day to day. And since they launched their new dual strategy or dialectic strategy in last May 21, when they launched rockets towards Jerusalem, okay, they actually succeeded in embarrassing the Palestinian Authority, Abu Mazen, Fatah, and all the Palestinian leadership by I would say, stressing the fact that they are incompetent. They positioned themselves as the defender of Jerusalem and the Palestinian Jerusalemites. They succeeded in bringing together all the Palestinian fronts, the Gaza Strip, East Jerusalem, the West Bank, the Arab citizens of Israel, and the Palestinians in South Lebanon. Okay, 5 fronts that they brought together as one terror fist against the state of Israel, and they are working pretty hard since May 21 in order to elaborate their capacities in all of these fronts, and they are building the option to operate all of these fronts simultaneously, or to divide, okay, I would say the responsibilities, or to divide the activities between the different fronts. And just for an example, in the last terror campaign this year, March to May 22, they decided to isolate the Gaza Strip, okay, and to keep the Gaza Strip out of the equation, out of the campaign. And they operated all the other 4 fronts, East Jerusalem, the West Bank, the Arab Israelis, and South Lebanon, because they have an interest to keep calm in the Gaza Strip due to three main reasons. The first one is to continue the reconstruction project led by the Egyptians and the Qatari in the Gaza Strip. This is something which is very essential for them to improve the economic situation and to get more working permits from the government of Israel, and because this is something which supports and improves dramatically the economy in the Gaza Strip. And thirdly, and most importantly, is to rebuild their military capacities under the calm, okay, in order to prepare themselves much better to the next round. And unfortunately, Israel cooperates in this way or another with this dual strategy. But using this dual strategy, Hamas improves its position vis-a-vis the Palestinian Authority, vis-a-vis Fatah, becomes more and more stronger, more and more influential in the Palestinian arena. And this is something which contributes also to the erosion of the legitimacy and popularity of Fatah and the Palestinian Authority. And now I would like to reach to some conclusions. And I would say that trying to categorize, I would say the main reasons for the Palestinian Authority's failure, I would say that the Palestinian Authority failed to make the right things in three categories: in the economic category, in the societal category, and in the political category. And here you can see what are what is the essence of the failures in each category. I already talked about it, but I think that there is something that is worth mentioning or elaborating on, and this is the Abraham Agreements or the Abraham Accords. You know that the Abraham Accords is something which, from the geostrategic point of view, it's a huge change in the strategic structure of the Middle East. And actually, this is the first time that there is a very strong axis or camp, which is composed of the strongest Sunni pragmatic countries in the Middle East, including Egypt, Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, Jordan, and Israel, of course, and I haven't mentioned Morocco and so on and so forth, but a very strong axis vis-a-vis the Iranian axis on the one hand and vis-a-vis the Jihadiyya Salafiyya and the Muslim Brotherhood on the other hand. And the idea of normalizing the relations with Israel without reaching to the agreement with the Palestinians, this is a precedent. This is something that was not believable, okay, before signing the agreements. And actually, the Palestinians hold for decades a sort of a veto power on any sort of normalization process between Israel and the Arab countries here in the region, here in the sphere. And the Arab countries were hostages in the hands of the Palestinians till the moment that the Arab leaders understood that what was considered to be a sort of a strategic asset, the Palestinian issue or the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, which was used by Arab leaders in order to divert, domestic pressures towards Israel and so on and so forth. This strategic asset became to be a strategic liable and prevented them from promoting major and essential interests of their country. And they just felt fed up from the Palestinians, and they decided to move on, to put aside the Palestinian issue, to put it very, very low in the priority list, and to move on, understanding the importance of Israel here in the sphere, the reliability of Israel, I would say the strength of Israel from the military point of view, from the intelligence point of view, and from the, I would say, the special relations point of view, the special relations that Israel has with America. And those Arab leaders understood that if the United States is going to continue its withdrawing from the Middle East, and if the United States will continue decreasing the priority or the importance of the Middle East in the American agenda, in the American strategic agenda, then they don't have an ally to trust on, and Israel is the address. And this is I would say, a very, very significant change, okay, in the regional structure. And it was a disaster, a strategic disaster for the Palestinians, because the Palestinians understood that they became to be in the bottom of the priority list, not only of the international community, but of the Arab world. Okay, and they know what the consequences are. Therefore, I think that this is a huge strategic loss for the Palestinians. And just in a nutshell, all the idea of civil society, the Palestinian Authority or the Palestinian leadership failed to build a vibrant and civil society, a vital civil society, and without a vital civil society, you cannot build a state. It's cut and clear. And of course, the failure to build a solid economic foundation, and the economy, and unfortunately, 90% of the Palestinian annual budget comes from international aid and from the taxes that Israel collects for the Palestinians. And let me just end with a citation of Ziad Abu Ziad, who used to be a minister in Palestinian governments in the first 2 decades. And he says the following: "We have failed to build the state from top down. They failed to build a state of law and address the basic problems of the citizens, including obtaining personal security and livelihood. All Arab regimes are corrupt and failing, and by implication, so is the PA." So in this regard, I have nothing to say but to agree with Ziad Abu Ziad, unfortunately, yes. And here I will leave it, I think, to Q&A, because these are some recommendations that I made for the near future, what can be done in this regard. And what can be done is what can be done by the Palestinian Authority, what can be done by the Palestinian society, what can be done by Israel, what can be done by the Arab countries here in the region, and what can be done by the international community. Each one of the players has a role, has responsibility, has potential contribution, but at the end of the day, and this will be the summarizing sentence, at the end of the day, it depends mostly on the Palestinians themselves. And if the Palestinians will not be able to cross the Rubicon, to make the extra mile, to accept the legitimacy of the state of Israel as the nation state of the Jewish people, and to I would say, to adopt more pragmatic approach, and to decide to build a state, which means, first of all, to make the strategic choice between reconciliation with Hamas or something else, because reconciliation with Hamas means that there is no political process with Israel. Reconciliation with Hamas, unification with Hamas means that at the end of the day, the Palestinian leadership prefers the armed struggle, the continuation of the armed struggle against the state of Israel, against the Zionist project, and not a peace process with the state of Israel. And therefore, it goes back to the Palestinians and the decisions that they have to do. We have to help them to make the right decisions. We, I mean Israel, the Arab countries, the international community, but at the end of the day, it's firstly and mostly in their hands. Sorry that I maybe left an impression of pessimism, but c'est la vie, this is life here in our neighborhood.
Yeah, thank you, Kobi. Now, we'll just ask you to close the screen sharing, that's it. We've actually used up our time, so we probably won't have time for questions. But Kobi, we might have to invite you back again and go into this in a little more detail. But thank you very much. It's a fascinating subject, and I'm sure you could have spoken for a lot longer on it. Just one quick question before we have to finish from me. Does the Palestinian Authority care who is the Prime Minister of Israel? We've got elections coming up. Does that make any difference at all to them?
The Palestinians?
Yeah.
I'm not sure about it, because I don't believe, and sincerely, I don't believe that the current Palestinian Authority, which is in a very fragmented and critical situation, because Abu Mazen, you know, all the time we were pretty occupied in thinking what is going to be in the day after Abu Mazen, okay, here in Israel. I think that we are already in the day after Abu Mazen. It's a crippled entity with almost no capacities. We see what is going there in Jenin district, okay, with the absence of any efficient or effective control of the Palestinians there. And I sincerely do not believe that the current Palestinian Authority really wants to create a breakthrough in the political process with Israel. I really don't believe that they are able doing that. Even if they want to do that, they are not able doing that because they have no legitimacy among their constituency. And I don't believe that Abu Mazen, in the end of his political life, or in the end of his life, generally speaking, because he's 87 years old and he's not so healthy, okay? I don't believe that he wants that his heritage, okay, his national heritage, will be remembered as a heritage of one who made a very, I would say, meaningful and unlegitimized concession to Israel, and betrayed the Palestinian national dream or aspiration. And therefore, I don't think that it makes a difference for the Palestinian Authority who, at the end of the day, will be the Israeli Prime Minister, or what will be the composition of the next Israeli government.
Okay. Kobi, we'll need to finish up now, so thank you very much for explaining it all. I did put a link to your article on the chat, so if people want to look at that, I think that will probably answer a lot of the questions that they had. So, Dr. Kobi Michael, thank you very much, and we would love to chat with you again in the future. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you. Thanks very much.
Okay, I'll just hand back to David. David can just give us a little update on what's coming up next week before we close. David, you're muted.
Thank you. I'll unmute myself. That will help. Okay, very quickly, as we always do, AJA needs support. I hope you've seen very recently the quality of some of the things that we've done, and today we've announced a victory with regard to SBS, a ruling that they have breached the code of practice in reporting on Israel, something that we handled all the way, and you'll have details in the email sent to you. And next week, we will be looking at a rather controversial matter, which is the conviction for a settler against a Palestinian family, the famous case of Amiram Ben Uliel, and a representative to consider was he in fact convicted for a crime that he did not commit. It's controversial and representative of some of the trouble in Judea Samaria.
Okay, thanks, David. All right, that's all we have for tonight. Now, I will mention that, as usual, Morris Klein's L'chaim program is on, and his guest tonight is Sarah Game, who is the South Australian politician.
Excellent.
That's a very interesting story. So if you head over to 3ZZZ, which is at FM 92.3 or 3ZZZ.com.au, you'll be able to hear what she has to say. Don't forget that you can keep up to date with what the AJA is talking about on our Facebook page. Please like it and share it widely. But for now, we wish you all a very good evening and look forward to seeing you again next week as usual. So from me, it's bye for now. Good night, everyone.